Hey guys, in our last video we talked about some beginner long-range setup options. And so we're going to talk today about how to build out a Tikka from something like this that you can buy stock to something more like this. Yeah, it's one take. All right, so step one is going to be getting our barreled action out of our factory stock. And this is a really easy thing to do. There are two screws at the bottom of your stock. These are called action screws, one right here and one right here. And we're just going to twist those out with our fix-it stick or any other properly sized hex tool. All right, so once we do that, we'll have something that looks like this. So this is our barreled action, or the gun part of the gun. With Tikkas, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the bolt out. So we're gonna press this button right here. The bolt just comes out. Set that aside so it's not in our way here. So you have your action, your barrel, and then the Tikkas have this trigger on here as well. Depending upon what your action is, if you have something like an R700 action or a Savage, it might look a little different. We're just gonna walk through the Tikka today, but a lot of it's gonna be overlap. You can, if you want to, swap out your Tikka trigger for a aftermarket one. I don't see a need to do that. I like the factory Tikka triggers. They're a really crisp single action and they're actually adjustable. So if you use this screw right here, you can tighten that screw or loosen that screw and that will add weight or subtract weight from your trigger pull. I can usually get these down to about 1 pound and 4 ounces, which is plenty good enough for my purposes. Once we got our barreled action out, we're gonna drop into our chassis. Lots of different chassis you can go with. This is a KRG Whiskey 3 Gen 6. I'm running this one just because my other chassis that I run on my NRL Hunter gun is also a KRG, so I like having the continuity. There are plenty of good ones out there. MDT makes some good ones. Vision Pro makes some good ones. XLR makes some good ones for the Tikka. So kind of you can look at them and decide what you want based upon what your needs are. All right, so once we got our barreled action out, now we're gonna get it into the chassis. So we're gonna take the action screws that come with whatever chassis you have, not the ones that came with the factory stock. And we're gonna use those to install it into the chassis. The important thing here is we're gonna take our recoil lug in the chassis and line it up with the cutout in our action. And we want this to be pushed back towards the butt of the chassis because if you think about it, when the gun fires, the barreled action is going to want to come backwards towards the shooter, right? And so we want to take all that slack of travel out of the system before we tighten it down. For these KRGs, the long screw and washer go in the back, the short screw and washer go in the front. And then we're gonna take our wrench and we're gonna tighten it down. How tight you wanna go with these, there's some debate on that. KRG says 65 inch-pounds is their recommended amount. Some barrel actions, they'll tell you like it a little bit less. I've heard some shooters say that Tikkas tend to perform a little bit better around 55 inch-pounds instead of 65 inch-pounds. It's up to you. You can kind of play around with it and experiment. I go 55 inch-pounds on my Tikkas. All right, so a couple of things to talk about on this part. We want to make sure that we go to a consistent pressure across both screws and that we tighten it down almost like lug nuts on a wheel, where we go halfway tight with each one and then go back and tighten them all the way up. So we'll do one and then the other. If you start encountering weird accuracy issues at some point during your shooting, one of the first things to check is these action screws to make sure they haven't loosened up, especially if you've had the gun in swings in temperature, humidity, elevation, like you've been on an airplane or something with it. I've found that after flying with these things, you want to double check these action screws before you go shoot your match or whatever, or your hunt or whatever else you're going to be doing. If we don't want the action screws loosening up, the logical question is, why don't we just use Loctite or, God forbid, Rockset on the action screws and solve the problem that way? There's a couple reasons why that might not be a good idea. With Precision rifles, we're going to be pulling this action out of this chassis sometimes for cleaning, for barrel swaps, for maintenance. So we might not want to do that and create more mess for us to clean up. The other issue is you can get false returns from your torque wrench on how tight the action screws are, because the Loctite will add friction to the screws as you're tightening it down. And this being a precision system, we want to have everything consistent throughout. We don't want to have them be 45 inch-pounds one time and 65 inch-pounds another time. So I personally don't use Loctite because I want to get a true consistent reading when I'm tightening the action screws out of the chassis. All right, so next we're going to do the Forend. Before we do that, I'm going to mention one thing that I have on here. I went ahead and installed the weight off camera. If this is a dedicated gamer rifle like this one's going to be, a lot of PRS guys like adding weight to the rifle. And weighted rifles, there have been different schools of thought throughout the years on what's good and what's bad. For the longest time, people wanted the heaviest possible rifle, and that's still popular. But almost as important as how heavy the gun is to soak up some of that recoil is how balanced the gun is. So if you decide to add weight to the rifle, which there's pros and cons to doing that, like we talked about in a previous video, you do want to make sure that you are balancing the rifle properly with that weight. So I'm adding a little bit of weight to this rifle. I want this rifle to come in at about 17.5 pounds for PRS. Some people like going way heavier, like 30 pounds. I'm just experimenting with a little bit more weight this season. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the Forend. So I'm going to run a KRG enclosed ARCA Forend. There's, again, lots of different options for Forends. You can go fully enclosed, you can go partially enclosed, you can go open top. It all comes down to what you're using it for, right? If you're a guy who's going to be running a clip-on night vision or thermal unit, you're going to want a top pick rail. Some people like to run enclosed top Forends to keep the mirage down and manage heat. I like having ARCA on my Forend because I can clip into my tripods, my bipods, and keep it nice and consistent that way. So that's what I'm running. I'm running this enclosed ARCA Forend. There's annoyingly 3 different types of ARCA rail now. There's your standard ARCA rail, which is just smooth ARCA like photographers would use. There's R-Lock, which you might see out there. If you've seen ARCA rail and it has like bites out of the side, almost looks like a squirrel came along and chewed on it. That's something called R-Lock. Nope, that's not. That's something else. I gotta check my notes. That's Arca-Lock. Just so you know, long-range precision shooting is annoying to me too. So when you're looking at different types of ARCA rail and you ask yourself, why are there 3 different types of ARCA rail? That's a great question, to which I have no answer to other than consumerism. The answer is there's pros and cons to it, right? So the original ARCA was actually a photography sort of rail that the PRS community has kind of, or the precision shooting community has kind of adopted. The problem with that is it's a smooth rail. So under recoil, you can see things like bipods or tripods or whatever you have clipped onto it slide back and forth sometimes if it's not tightened down enough. To get around that, the shooting industry has developed 2 other types of ARCA, R-Lock and Arca-Lock. Arca-Lock is the ones where if you look at an ARCA rail and there's like bite marks out of the sides, almost looks like a squirrel chewed on it. That's what R-Lock is. Arca-Lock is the really right stuff system where there's actually a tab on their adapters that comes up and locks into these little circle cutouts inside of, on the bottom of the ARCA rail. So that's what I use. I'm not saying one is better or the best of the 3. This is just my preference because I already had some of these mounts because I like how they are also pick rail compatible as well. So that's what I'm going to be using for this. So again, for these KRGs, yours could be different. You get something different than the KRG, but for these KRGs, they just slide in over the top here. And then there's going to be these 6 screws. We're going to pop in here and torque down. These you certainly could lock tight if you want to. These are to be tightened down to roughly 24 inch-pounds. I'm not going to just because I take my Forend off for service more than I would like to, and I don't want to have to deal with re-Loctiting it all the time. After we install the Forend, what we're going to want to do is we're going to, before we get the scope on this thing, we want to adjust our length of pull. You've probably heard the old thing about you should put the buttstock in the crook of your elbow and make sure that you can hold the rifle. That's at least a good place to start. I like to do that and make sure I can still get a 90-degree trigger press, which means that the nail on my trigger finger is 90 degrees perpendicular to the bore. I said that right. And then once you get that done, if you really want to do your due diligence on this, you can actually put your bipod on, go prone, and run the bolt a little bit without an optic on to make sure that you can manipulate the controls of this with that buttstock properly adjusted. All right, so now we got to mount the scope to the gun, this being a precision rifle. So you got a couple options for mounting your scope to your gun. You could do a mount like we have here, or you could do rings. Both are good. I like having an actual dedicated mount, especially when you're starting out, because you can get one nice scope and then move it from gun to gun to gun as needed. So this particular mount is a spur mount. There's lots of good mounts out there. Spur is not the cheapest game in town, but there's good reason for that. These are incredibly durable mounts. I've used this one for 3 years and have had no issues. They also are incredibly modular, so you can add things like side levels or a diving board for your weapon-mounted laser rangefinder to it very easily. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the base, or the mount on the base. And we're going to tighten these side screws down just by hand, and we're going to mount this to the base first. We're going to press the mount forward, because again, if we think about recoil, the barreled action is going to be coming this way, which means the inertia of the scope is going to want the scope and mount to go this way. So we're going to take all that slack out of the system before we tighten this down. And the nice thing about these spur mounts is they have actually numbers on here and how you want to tighten these down. So it goes for the screws 1, 2, 3, 4. And then again, we're going to do those just like lug nuts in a car to the spec, where we go halfway and then full way to the full torque values. One thing you don't want to do is get your torque values for your scope base versus the ring screws confused. You want to go usually around the 45 inch-pounds to the scope base, but if you do that to rings, you're probably going to wreck your scope because that's way too much weight on the housing of the scope. All right, so once we got that on there, now we're going to put our scope on. And we're going to tighten these down just enough so that our nice scope doesn't fall out when we adjust the eye relief, because that would be an incredibly sad day. Ask me how I know. So just enough so that it doesn't fall out, but enough where we can still move it forward and twist it within the mount. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have proper eye relief. And how that works is we're going to go prone first, and then we're going to look through our optic, and we don't want to see scope shadow on the sides of the optic. I want to make sure that we're not like we're looking at a tube where it's a dark ring around it if it's too close or too far back within the mount. So I want to make sure that we have proper eye relief and we can see the picture clearly with no shadows or distortions on the edges of the image. I like to do that prone, tighten these down a little bit, and then double check from like a standing supported tripod or kneeling supported position, because our eye relief is going to be a little bit different depending upon how we're behind the gun. And especially competition shooters, we don't shoot prone all that often. maybe like 20% of the time. And so I like to optimize slightly towards like a standing or kneeling position versus prone. The nice thing about optics like this Leopold Mark IV HD is some modern optics are very forgiving on eye relief, so you can still get a perfect image in both positions. But just double check to make sure that your eye relief is adjusted properly and usably for multiple positions that you may find yourself in. So once we've got the proper eye relief in the scope, it's time to tighten these down to our factory specs. As we do that, we want to make sure that the scope is level. So it's very important to have a level scope in your gun. If you think about long-range shooting, when we're dialing for longer distances, essentially what we're doing is we're moving the crosshairs up within the optic, right? We're technically moving the image up, whatever. If you think about what we're doing in long-range shooting, we're moving our point of aim up in the optic when we dial for elevation. If we have cant built into the system, whether through a canted gun or an improperly mounted optic, instead of just adding elevation, we'll actually add elevation and windage. And so we'll start not only not having the proper amount of elevation, but we'll have left and right misses as we add windage adjustments in by just having it mounted improperly. So it's very important that we mount our scopes level. Leveling a scope is quite a journey if you don't have the proper tools. I have found that the proper tools and profanity go a long ways towards getting a very level optic. One of the reasons why I like these spur optics is they have a built-in leveling device. So they come with this little triangle thing, and they have a cutout here, as you can see, on the side of the mount. And so all you do is you put that triangle into the cutout, and you use that as a flat base on the bottom of your scope to mechanically level the scope. And then you tighten these screws down as you gradually pull that triangle out to make sure it doesn't get stuck. But then you know that you have mechanically leveled this optic to the base. There are other ways that involve putting bubble levels on the turret and on the scope base and on your buttstock sometimes. Those can be really tricky because as you tighten the screws, what you'll find is a lot of mounts, the rings will bite and actually twist the optic as you tighten it. So it can be a very frustrating experience. Again, these spur mounts are not cheap. You don't need them, but they are nice to have because they're super easy for things like leveling. So, unfortunately, in this world, you often get what you pay for. So, once you got that, we're almost done. Then you add anything you want for accessories. So you can, again, you can check your balance point, and this is when you can add or reduce weight. You can add a muzzle device or a suppressor. I like running suppressors on precision guns. I ran a comp for a while, and what I found was shooting in enclosed areas with a comp on a higher caliber gun is zero fun for you, and it's especially zero fun if you're working with a teammate or a spotter. So I like running suppressors to reduce the signature on these. This one's going to get an Able Company suppressor, but something like this Huxworks is a great option too. This is when you can adjust things like your cheek pieces if you want like a rubber overmolded cheek base. Or any levels or timers. This is when you can add those. So these spur mounts have a built-in level at the bottom of them. I don't like having to kind of adjust my head to look underneath the scope to see if it's level or not. So I added a spur side level here. I have not tested this yet. I can already see some areas about this that I might not like, but I do like where it puts the level within my field of view behind the optic. So again, there's lots of other good options that we talked about before. Levels can run anywhere from $30 up to $300. It depends upon what your budget and what your use case is. All right, and so that's all there is to it. If you want to take something like this Tikka that we have in the shop and drop it into a chassis for something like PRS or NRL Hunter or just long-range training in general, it's not too difficult if you just follow the steps and check your torque values and take your time. if you ever get frustrated, something gets stuck, instead of starting to bang on things with a hammer or torque down really tight, take a breath, walk away, come back in 10 minutes. You'll usually be able to approach it with a little bit better mindset. I'm saying this from experience. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments. Happy to help you out with any questions that you have. Again, there's lots of different options for how you can build out one of these. This one specifically, I'm going to be shooting in the PRS season here locally this year, and I'm trying some different things to see what I like. And that's one of the fun things about precision rifle shooting is if you try things and you don't like it, you can always sell the pieces that you don't like and buy new pieces and try something different. So don't be afraid to try new things. I'm Samuel Schmitt with Team Founder Arms. Thanks for watching.